Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Art Forum San Francisco, co-sponsored by the South Asian departments of UC Santa Cruz, Berkeley, and Stanford University, we welcome you all to Sala 2023. The topic for this session is Crafting Conversations with our guest speaker, Radhi Parekh and Meenu Devrani. Meenu Devrani is an artist interested in heritage crafts of India and issues such as social inequality and the climate crisis's effect on the fashion industry. With over 10 years of experience creating nature-inspired jewelry, she runs her studio jewelry brand Vasvara. Additionally, she advocates for slow fashion and market accessibility for artisans in marginalized communities. Before we start, just a few house rules. Please make sure your phones are turned off, are on silent, and no flash photography or recording, please. So with that, let's give our panelists a big round of applause.
Thank you so much, Charu, for the warm introduction. I am super excited to welcome Radhi here and all of you. And thank you, Art Forum SF, for giving us this space in such a supportive and inspiring way. I have known Artisan Center way longer than I have known Radhi. We just got introduced a few weeks ago. And all I can say is it's been an absolute pleasure, Radhi, to have gotten to know you. And I would like to say that, she comes from this genuine place of, empathy, respect, curiosity about the, art and design communities coming from India. And, once we started talking, every time we would go over 90 minutes. So, you can tell that it's a riveting conversation when both of us are talking, because I forget to feed my dogs even, so I was like, oh my God. And against the backdrop of Radhi's journey with her store, gallery, and I also call it a quiet movement, we will delve into the changing narratives of India's craft economy, artisans' agency, cultural sustainability, conscious consumption, and responsible creation practices, and unpack some issues that I feel are very imminent to the South Asian landscape, where art, design, and craft often intersect. And we know that Artisan Center has been a fertile ground for all things art, design, and craft. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation, Radhi. A little closer? Okay. Oh, okay. All right. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay. Just to add a little perspective, handmade creative production is the largest employer in India, which is also true for whole of South Asia and most of the developing world. A staggering 70% of who are women. And apparel and textile exports, including handicrafts, stood at 44.4 billion in year 2022, a rise of 41% year over year. And this still only constitutes 4% of the global textile and apparel trade, right? We were talking about that, Radhi. So as the global demand for authentic, high quality, handmade products that embrace the values of trust, craftsmanship, and fairness grows, so does India's potential to become a leader in sustainable production practices, as well as, a leader in decarbonization, as Raghu Karnad writes in he's one of the panelists, esteemed panelists in Sala 23. He says, and I will quote him, a leader in decarbonization, and he says, could India become a champion, not just a casualty of the climate crisis? And we hope to shift the narrative from subsidy and charity to one about sustainability and excellence in craft. So once again, I thank you, all of you, for being here. And I will start, Radhi, my first question. You started Artisans Center when e-commerce was becoming very much a fabric of everyday life all over the world. India was well into a decade of opening its doors for foreign investment. MNC retail brands were setting up retail shops in India. And you set up Artisans Center, a brick and mortar store gallery focused on artisanal craftsmanship and craft as an experience. Could you please tell us how you got started and how living in India and witnessing its living heritage, as well as living in SF and London, shaped your views about the value of handmade?
We have a few slides just to show you the evolution of artisans. But before I go there, I think the genesis for artisans as an enterprise, and particularly a social enterprise, came from realizing that after the 90s and the influx, the liberalization of the economy and the influx of global brands, there was, over 2 decades, one saw a sort of homogeneity coming into the urban spaces, what people chose to wear, what they were living with. And I was living here at that time, and I felt that we were at risk of losing a certain rootedness. And part of that was the impetus for artisans, where craft and design were very much part of one's identity. And how can we showcase the contemporary craft and design and indigenous art in a new way at an elevated level, at the level of a gallery. So this was the big shift. I remember that when I went back in 2009 with not really a firm idea of what to do, we had a building in Kalagoda that was begging for restoration. We had Sabyasachi, whom you probably all know, his flagship store downstairs. And even though he represented the very highest point of handmade at that time, craft was still seen as cheap and cheerful. So it really wasn't, no one was seeing what I could see in terms of the sorts of things that would just elevate handmade in India. And I just thought we could share some slides. So this is 2008. The building at the corner faces the synagogue, and it had just been strengthened with, concrete. It's an old vernacular building. Next. And this is what Artisans looks like today. It's got a wonderful mural by Samir Kulavur, who's now gone on from an illustrator to a global artist. People tell me that we should have competitions for this mural every year, but I'm still a little attached to this one. Next. And the inside of the gallery is a 900 to 1,000 square foot space, right up to the high original pyramidal roof. And I was very keen that if we were talking about art, craft, design, and all the related cultures that they bring with it, that it be a warm and accessible place, that it would not be a cold, white gallery. So you see some of that. This is the entrance. And what was really, what we were plugging into was, this notion that India has an amazing craft trajectory, that not only before independence, of course, with the Khadi movement and Gandhi really making it the nucleus of his strategy, after independence, India became the first country in 1951 to include craft in its development. And when I say craft, that went on to design and design institutes as well. So it was the only post-colonial country that has craft as its development agenda. And that's something that I really felt very strongly about. So it wasn't just about beautiful pieces, but that the village could be the nucleus of a new kind of development once again, and also that livelihood would, once again get decentralized. So our tagline or our leitmotif is the intersection of art, craft, and design. So as a gallery, we sort of reposition ourselves to be looking for those blurry lines between art, craft, and design. And of course, as you know, in India, there is no separate word for art or craft or design. It's all kala. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So that's our tagline. And with our artisans front and center, yep. And then, as I said, it's indigenous arts, so we've embraced, we were the first to showcase Matani Pachedi, which is a very indigenous and ritual art form from Ahmedabad. And we've gone out to Madhya Pradesh and looked for artists from the Gond and the Bhil tribe. But never in all of our exhibitions do we say that, this is a Bhil artist or a Gond artist. I really try to give respect to the signature of that voice. And we're always looking for that signature of the artist who makes it his own. So with Varli art, which is very common in Bombay with its proximity to the village where Varli art is painted, we show the work of two brothers who are really taking it quite to the edge. And also addressing, their concerns through their art. So it's more than just a formal art, it's a living art. And that's what we're looking for. This is Pabi Ben, whose work I very much admire because she went on from being an artisan to a designer and an entrepreneur. And this is just a click through, you can go quickly, but we try and represent the different media, the different materials, and this is just from the last year. There's always a lot of textiles in India. We also do collaborations with, here in this case, Japanese lacquer. And then the next one is indigenous art from Australia, from a northern. And then this was a recent exhibition with the quilt form, but which I thought was very contemporary in the play of color and composition. Book launches and wonderful workshops. So this was an inclusive sari draping workshop, which was meant for women of all shapes and sizes, and it was very successful. So we've, as you know, the sari is becoming, is being adopted as a cool thing to wear. And there are so many drapes that people are exploring now. More workshops. And then this was something that we did for Lakme Fashion Week. They'd asked us to do an exhibition on the textiles, and it's something Meena and I have talked about, which I had called this another exhibition, Please Touch, because there's so many imitations in the market. The only way you're going to educate yourself is with your fingertips. But this was what followed. What is the second life of clothing? And I called it reincarnations. And I feel, a lot of people in India are looking towards the West for the next trend. But I think it's time for us to claim a thrifty way of life, which is, just looking at the traditions in India that still live. So quilting being one of them. And this is an artist who works with textile art, and she works with large pieces that you see on the right, 2 necklaces for us. And this is someone who works with waste metal that you would find at a mechanic shop that most women would not venture to go to. But for this fashion show, she created really sculptural pieces. And then this is one of our most important initiatives. So as you probably noticed, everything up until here were things that we sourced, that we didn't design. There was a lot of mentoring with young emerging designers, artists, and artisans, but we didn't really do any design and production. So this was a big change. We worked in Nagaland with women that spin and weave and process stinging nettle. So most people think of stinging nettle as the leaves, but it's the stalk that it comes from. And in Nagaland, stinging nettle grows really tall, so the stalk is really lovely and long, and they process it in the traditional way. And so for the first time, we set up the Artisan Sustainable Development Foundation. And this is our first venture to really walk the talk, to really design and develop in a mindful, value-based way. And that's where it ends. Just a little introduction.
Raise your hands if you think our table is one of the most beautiful tables in all of the Sala talks that have happened. Yeah. And I think later Radhi will invite you guys to come and touch this, feel this, and she'll talk more about this particular textile as well. Before we delve any deeper into our conversation, I really wanted you, Radhi, to explain some of the occupation labels we associate in this space. Artists, artisans, craftsmen, co-creators, artisan entrepreneur, artisan designers, and just talking to someone, I felt that we all do not, have the same shared definition or feeling about some of these titles. And I feel that to truly elevate the value of handmade, we need to have a shared understanding of these labels. So could you just for the sake of our audience understanding, go over some of the definitions?
Sure. So I'll often come across an artist who does one-offs, who does production work, And so I find that the work typically of an artisan, either working with a designer or on their own, is on a spectrum. And I sort of talk about it, and you know, most of you would understand Hindi. So I say at one end of the spectrum, you have kalakari. You have, you know, the highest level of art that is made. And then you have karigari somewhere in the middle, which is incredible skill. And then at the very end, you have majuri, which is just labor. And I find that this spectrum is very useful to be able to see, what is our response to the work? How do we treat artists, artisans, and particularly to look at increasingly a less industrial model where you're hoping that the artisan will not be relegated to being a majur or a labor who's just producing in an industrial format. So while, you know, craftsmanship is certainly trending, particularly after COVID, you had some very important people like Lee Edelcourt of Trend Union proclaim that the future is handmade. And at the same time, you have this question of scale. How much scale is good scale? Also, I wanted to bring into this, there's been a wonderful new development which coincided with my moving to India, which was a school of artisans school of design for artisans that was set up by a visionary woman, Judy Frater. She, you know, she studied the Rabaris, which is a tribe in Gujarat, and then after the earthquake came, you know, they said, you've been studying us for so long, what can you do for us now? So she started Kalaraksha and then Kalaraksha Vidyalaya, and the Vidyalaya has a year's course for men and women artisans. And it's a new cadre of, you know, artisans who are artisan designers. And then that school has morphed into Somaya Kalavidya that you mentioned. And we had the first exhibition of their artisan designer entrepreneur. So they did a second program in management. And it's been very exciting to see these people in the market and, you know, really learning directly from the market. So even with the three Kalakari, Karigari, and Majuri that I spoke about, typically it's, you know, so far with design schools also mediating between the craftsperson and the market. So it's very interesting to see them enter the market, make their observations, and then design for the market on their own terms. And I find that very, very exciting. It's a new direction for India.
I often, when I think of artist and artisan, to me, this doesn't really, you know, resonate as a power dynamic at all, like, you know, as if the artisan is lower than the artist. I feel that they are basically the same. The only difference between, you know, artisan and artist may be that artisan is carrying on a living tradition. For an artisan to be part of the community from which this craft originates, to be part of that community is as important as his own personal expression through the continuing of the craft. You know, so I just wanted to add that as well, because I feel that sometimes people say, oh, artisan, why are not they called artists? And I feel it's one and the same thing, you know. And we learned that you did a project in Nagaland. And I also found out that you actually went and visited. Is this something that you often do, visiting the craftsmen in their own communities? And do you feel that, have you learned something that you felt you would never have learned if you actually did not visit in person? Any lasting memories or impacts of such trips? Would you like to talk about that?
So Nagaland is on many ways very special. It's, when I encountered it, I was traveling with two journalists, and you know how journalists get invited and get treated in a very special way. So this little village of Leshmi that we were invited to gave a show of how the stinging nettle was made. And I was just so moved that something as scratchy and stinging as nettle could become soft cloth. And we spent time with them, and it turns out that not only is it almost like a last frontier, it is actually with unfortunately a large four-lane highway that's going to come through it. But because of the remoteness, it's also as sustainable as you would want, as if we were looking at zero carbon footprint, it's as sustainable as it can be. So the second time round, when they were part of our Lakme Fashion Week show, we went there, it was quite cold, and you can see nothing is wasted. Everything is utilized, and it's a long process into the process of making this cloth. The cloth also stands for social status. That red shawl can't be worn by just anyone. It has to be earned. And then this is the nettle shawl that they create, and the way in which they create it. So we've turned the sound off, but you can look for this on YouTube, because the women sing in the most beautiful a cappella. This is the Pek region of Nagaland, and the Chakasang women are one of the most musical. They just have music in them. And this used to be a utilitarian shawl, but it's now, dying. One of the realities in all of the different places that I go to is that a lot of people in the village wear secondhand clothing. So, it's so much more easy in terms of warmth and washability and all of that. So I noticed that this lovely stinging nettle is on its way out in terms of, probably getting extinct. So we decided to work with them. But in terms of, what you were saying about any memorable experiences, and we do travel a lot all over India. I wouldn't say every place that we source from I've been to, but Gujarat, West Bengal, Nagaland, Madhya Pradesh, Bihar have certainly been places that I've had first-hand experience with. And it always brings me back to this idea of the humanity of the people who are involved with handmade. I remember on a Sunday, while I was at the village, there was all this commotion in the room next door, and early in the morning, and I woke up and asked, what was that? So they were rationing out the new rice from the paddy fields. So remember, it was rationed. And then as we left, we were given a very generous few kilos of that rice to take away with us. And I just thought that was such a sign of a different pace of living, a different respect for not just your environment, but fellow human beings. There seems to be, even though we tend to other the people in rural India, there seems to be an equity in their mind, which is always creating this hospitality that brings you into their home and their craft and the work.
So I have this funny story about stinging nettle. Stinging nettle is something that grows in the Himalayan range, up in the mountains, and we are natives of Uttarakhand as well. And it just grows wild there. And my parents have not so fond memories of teachers using this as a punishment, like they would actually hit students. So, and I know, I mean, we are no longer in that sort of environment, but just I thought, I would add that. My next question darts around the subject of tradition and innovation. While on surface, the two may seem disconnected. When we think of tradition, we usually think that, we really do not think innovation. But the very reason that some of these heritage crafts have survived, hundreds and thousands of years is because these people knew how to adapt and innovate as the markets or the world around them changed. In your experience, can you please share any examples of this? And also, how are emerging artisans changing the narrative in their own way without the aid of intermediaries like NGOs, and also in terms of material and design innovation and accessing larger markets themselves?
So as you know, the pandemic was, a big impetus for the artisans to go online and directly sell to the market, which made us think whether we had a raise or death to be, at a shop. That helped them connect not only with one-on-one with customers, but also wholesale. So things are changing. But what I thought, in answer to that, Meenu, you saw the picture of Pabi Ben, the Rabari woman. Now, I don't have something that she would have traditionally embroidered. That's a missing link in my story. But 20 years ago, they were asked by their elders to stop creating dowry pieces. They're from the Debaria Rabari community. Not all Rabaris were asked that, but they felt too much time was being spent, women were getting older by the time they finished their dowries and went to their husbands' homes. And they felt both for the dowry as well as the jewelry. So now there's a cap on the jewelry, but on the dowry, it's very strict. They can't embroider for themselves. They can embroider for the commercial companies, and there's so many of them. So there's the story of Pabi Ben, who, when it came to her wedding, it was after this moratorium where they couldn't embroider for themselves. So instead, she instituted a sort of, sewing machine in her home, and she started gathering ribbons and laces and things from the local haberdashers. And this is more or less, not the color, but more or less what she made as a wedding gift, as a takeaway. And it got christened the Pabi bag, and it became a huge rage. And for 10 years, she was making this at Kala Raksha. And then about 5 years ago, she stepped out onto her own, and her husband joined her. Her husband had been working at a local Kirana grocer's store. and the two of them are a force to reckon. So she was given the the Woman Craft Entrepreneur of the Year award in about 2016-17. And then we've had many chats, and I've been noticing what they are wearing. So they wear a mixture of this, and then there's embroidery. So the last time I met her, I was talking to her and I said, how many machines do you have at the moment? Have you added more machines to the 10 to 12 she had? She said, no, I remembered our conversation. And instead of doing just the machine-made bags, she's now getting the local women, she's got 500 women in her village, to go back to the embroidery, to go back to the applique, but in a way that, it integrates the two. So I think, when you were talking about adaptation and how it's a living thing, I love old things, so I'm always looking for old embroidery. But I've come to appreciate the evolution of the embroidery. When spangly sequins came in, they found themselves into this. When fluorescent wool came in, that was included. So whereas a lot of us would be purists and say that, where's that old vegetable dyed, pure Gujarat Kutch work, I'm beginning to really appreciate the new work, which includes so many different materials, and it's a sign that it's alive.
You want to talk about that beautiful Tasar Bhujodi stole that we have here?
Yes.
Just quickly.
So this is another interesting example of change. I think I can be heard, right? Oh, right. I can hold it. So this is another example of change. This is done by a weaver in a place called Bhujodi in Kutch. And this weaver traditionally would have taken the rabari, the shepherd's wool, goat wool, camel wool in the early days, and made it into shawls. And these shawls for the rabaris, they're tribal, right? So they had very set designs that they were weaving. Now, in the 1970s, a school of design that's in Gujarat got involved with documenting their work. And there was some design intervention. But what I find is amazing is moving from design intervention to co-creation, and then now to the artisan becoming the designer and the maker. And this artisan really knows his warp and weft. So I don't know whether you can see it, maybe if I lay it down. He's introduced the idea of ikat in it. So while Bhujodi has a GI, which is a geographical indicator, so at the very bottom, he's kept to the rabari motifs, but he's introduced new materials, and every time he's in Bombay, I always say, softer, softer, So it's mineral dyed black, ikat, with tussar, and the warp is cotton. So, and all these lovely tassels are done by the women in the family, the daughter, the new bride. So the entire family gets involved.
How many of you have heard about Chamar Studio based out of Mumbai? Just wanted to add that, especially we were talking about material innovation.
and as well as marginalized communities, because when we really look into handmade crafts in India, we know that when it comes to working with hands, most of these communities are actually from lower caste communities. And Tamara Studio is a wonderful example of self-sovereignty and innovation in materials, because they have historically been an ostracized community. And maybe some of you are aware that this word is actually, or was, and maybe in some regions still is used as an ethnic slur. And they created a brand, identity using the same word, using it instead as a matter of pride. And when in 2015, beef ban adversely affected their business, they went on to find an alternate, which is automobile tire tubes, totally recycled. And they retrained their artisans in using that material and built a beautiful circular design studio. And so I think we'll move on to the next question. When Radhi and I start talking about these issues, I know we just keep chatting on, and so we have to make sure that we end up on time too. So just moving on along. As the demand for sustainable products grows globally, so has grown the greenwashing in terms of gimmicky marketing and false sustainability claims. There is an increasing trend in India, I have noticed lately, where big industrialists are coming into the sphere of handmade economy. An industrial giant, for example, which is bringing in ultra-fast fashion like Shein, is also launching a handmade in India line of business. How do customers make sense of this vastly contrarian ethos? And is it time for them to become even more discerning as customers?
That's a very good question. I have to just explain that these initiatives that are kind of like privatized initiatives, they could be CSR or they could be main business, are initiatives of scale. And so predominantly, it's got to make money for the company, which is a very different way in which craft was so far promoted. But I think it's important. I think it gives the opportunity to democratize craft if it was done right, because a lot of us are sort of quoting the West and saying, handmade is luxury. But I really do believe that if we can create enough demand, handmade need not be luxury if the supply is there. And that was one thing. And
I like to often call it accessible luxury.
yes, yes, yes. Yes, that's right. Yes.
All of a sudden there is this like connoisseurship
Yes.
involved and the prices go way high up. But
Yes.
India, this is not to put down the value. I mean, they are all about elevating the value of handmade. But we do have that advantage of supply and demand, a nice balance of that.
I think also, it's very interesting to hear 10 years ago when we started, 12 years ago, I had a lot of artisans saying that my child or my younger brother will not want to be an artisan. And he used a very visual metaphor. He said, our collars get really dirty and everyone wants a white collar job. And I've always remembered it. He was one of those who walked the Lakme Fashion Week for the very first time. An artisan walked that ramp and had a huge order. So I haven't really, I think he thinks very differently now. But at the same time, this question of scale is very important, because I rephrase it using the Sustainable Development Goal, responsible production and responsible consumption. And with responsible production, you're really being mindful of the raw material, which processes can be motorized, which ones can't be mechanized. Because in the digital world, it's very easy to digitally produce all of this. Or in the power loom, all of this. So I think that responsible production is one thing, but how can we as consumers be more responsible consumers? In answer to your question about handmade scaling, and I'm aware, for instance, that there is a sari shop that's going to have 5,000 stores that already has started showing the original handloom with the power loom side by side, but transparently saying that this is a power loom. But they had to do it because it can't scale. Kanchivaram sari can only scale so much. So it's a question that I'd still like to find an answer to, but I think at the heart of it, if one has on both sides a certain consciousness, production, business, and consumer, that might.
Too little demand kills a craft. Too much demand can also kill a craft. And if not totally decimate it, it can certainly dilute it. We have seen that, as soon as something becomes really popular, the imitations become rampant. Have you witnessed this dichotomy in your own experience?
All the time. All the time. So I think for every authentic thing, particularly in the world of textiles, there are many, many more copies that are made, often by the craftspeople. So I go into Ajrakpur and they have many sheds where block printing is being replaced by screen printing. It's still handmade, but of course it's not Ajrak, it's not the blocks, the way in which the blocks are done. So yes, I see it all the time, and imitations really abound. Not only something as simple as block printing to screen printing or handloom to power loom, but I think with technology, it reminds me very much of the turn of the last century with William Morris trying to, introduce an alternative to industrialization. And here we are in with a technology where you can print bandhani and shibori and ajrak and ikat, and most people would not be able to tell. So I think it's up to us consumers. I sometimes feel like the craft police, even at exhibitions. There are these multi-designer exhibitions that are by the Crafts Council of India. And right at the top of the heap will be things that aren't the genuine article. So I think it's up to us to learn, and I was saying, to make our fingertips sensitive to the feel of the real thing.
Since we are down to last, 10 minutes, we are ready to take questions. Radhi, are you ready?
Yes.
Here, I will hand you.
Yes?
On that same point of being a responsible consumer, what are some of the best ways for us living in the U.S. to get in touch with these artisans, the work that they're selling now that they're moving into more e-commerce, and not get sucked into the first top 10 hits on Google that may not actually be, the most direct path to
Right. Yes. So for those of us, the question is, for those of us living in the US, how can we get access to these textiles or clothing or anything? Instagram is a great source, and it'll just lead you from one to the other. I think the way in which people talk about their product is often a giveaway. If there's too little process, you know that shortcuts have been taken. And the look and feel of it. Of course, you can't feel it, but the look of it. Yeah.
And ask a million questions. Even if you think you have found the artisan, ask them questions. What are the materials you have? What your process is
Right.
like? That really helps, I think,
Yes.
clarify things, and you want to work with, or talk from genuine, authentic artisan makers.
Yes.
So I think digital homework today is very, very active on Facebook and Instagram these days.
Yes.
You could even search if you just search by the craft name or heritage craft name, you can see often posts come up, and then you can follow that along to see if you can connect.
So the other thing is the price is a giveaway. If it's too low, there's something wrong. And very often, artisans themselves, try to meet the demand of price-conscious consumers. So that's the other thing. Yes.
Is there an artist guild or something that we can go to instead of just relying on pictures on Instagram? Maybe they have vetted these people and
Yes.
a little higher, but at least we don't have to go and find out for ourselves, because that would be somewhat.
Yes. So the Crafts Council of India is meant to be that guild in terms of policy and also creating market for Indian craft. There are good websites. Jaipur, I think, is good. We're online. We're at Artisans Center, CENTRE, like the UK spelling. The US one wasn't available. Flourish is a new one for clothing, very mindful work.
And I believe Paramparik Karigar, often, if you follow their page, they will have makers' information, right there on their pages, if you wanted to access them directly. And Dastkar and as well as...
Do they have a website?
Dastkar they have an online space as well. And if you follow their posts, sometimes they also, share artisans' information.
But to really learn more about craft in India, the Craft Revival Trust by Ritu Sethi is the best Bible.
Very, very good.
She's, very broad and very deep. Ritu Sethi's Craft Revival Trust. Yes.
Yes, so the information you just shared is for the consumers who want to order some special items, so they can
Yes.
go to these websites or Instagram and all that. But my question is that I actually have a store in Colorado, and the idea of the store is like a gallery and shop of the finest handcrafted textiles. And I also travel all over, and I ran a wholesale business for 15 years, and now this is my first retail store.
Wonderful.
So the question is that I have tried on Instagram to get a lot of suppliers, and sometimes it's really hard. I have tried to contact them, even in Bhujodia. In fact, I would kill to have this store in my store.
Right.
Have those bags in my store. How do I tell these guys? I mean, I need sort of the names of these guys to wholesale them to me. I'll happily carry everything.
Right.
So I want to bring the best of India here. How do I do that?
Wonderful. Well, we can talk. Definitely. Yeah. Yes. About wages. Good question. So, Right. You mean our model? That's a very good question. So our model is very much a consignment model. We don't buy everything in advance. We consign it, and then we built a very regular payment schedule for monthly billing, and there's a great deal of trust that's been built that way. But during the pandemic, when people really needed cash sales, we were, supporting them that way too. About the wage, yes. So for those of you, you're working in manufacturing, and you would look at the wage, right? Labor. Yes. So this is the big thing. Yes. And this is the big question at the moment. You have the government scheme, it's called the MNREGA, the Rural Employment Development Scheme, which defines the minimum wage in that locality. And artisans are paid way lower than that. And so there's a great migration that I see from high-skilled jobs to the kind of jobs that MNREGA gives them, which is roads, building walls, repairs. So this is a reality. Yeah. So those the master craftsmen, of course, are doing very well because they've reached a certain price point for their work, and it's not on a labor basis, but this is a very real question. And especially, how can we keep the young people in craft when not only are they very well educated, the next generation, and so they come back if their if their fathers have a good business, then they come back and they manage the business. But they don't really not all of them, get involved with the making. And I find that even with women and embroidery, even with Pabi Ben, she was telling me, I can't find these women because they're just scrolling on their mobiles. They're so distracted. And the other day I was talking to a Kashmiri weaver, and he said our forefathers had a different approach to craft. It was not about earning money from it. It was about the time you spent, the experience. It reminds me a little bit of calligraphy, which is something I used to do, where you just lose sense of time, that going into that meditative state. And craft was that. And so you had these very fine, very detailed, lovingly made things, whereas when they're made for the market, it changes. Yes. Good question.
I would also like to add that even though you mentioned devices as being distracting, I think technology has also been an equalizer for the artisan community. They are able to communicate directly with customers, and they can research what others are charging for what they are doing. So I feel that has definitely improved in last 2 decades. They're becoming more aware about their own worth. Yeah.
Is it also inclusive that you also including Bangladesh, Pakistan, like others, or in the second? Yeah.
So I'm from Thailand. We're married, we just moved here. I'm from Pakistan, and this is what I'm wearing right now is completely handwoven within Pakistan in Banaras. So basically, Banaras people, everybody, my father
Yes.
and everybody came. So I myself went on a research and documentation to Banaras. is why I'm here and I'm so happy to have this conversation right now. So I just wanted to know if there's a certain kind of forum that we can sort of develop so that there's a cross collaboration between Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, so that there's a holistic platform for textile, artisans, designers, entrepreneurs, so that we can just come together. Because I know if you talk about this in Pakistan, it'd be like Pakistan, India, all of that. But when you're in the US, you can collectively come together and build something properly.
Right, right. So, yeah. So, I don't know whether you know of some of the initiatives at Delhi Heart by Jaya Jaitley. So, she invites people from different countries. But this has been a dream of mine to virtually bring the subcontinent together. Also, when you realize how closely related right across the border the crafts are. So Ajrak, that Nilufar is doing in Karachi, and which we're doing. And, even if we can have that exchange of designers, and I don't know how to make that happen. Right.
Is it okay if we tell people if they have to go to the next section
Yes,
or if they
yes.
want to hang out?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. There is so much interest. If you want to hang around and have questions, you're welcome to. If you're here for the next session, Amitav Ghosh's 6 p.m., it is outdoors. So thank you so much. Yes. But yeah, if you have questions, please hang around.